At a time when studios were trying to gain some confidence in depicting comic book characters on screen, Batman Forever ended up being one that fell short in some aspects, while at the same time overachieving in a variety of other ways. Joel Schumacher took Tim Burton's legacy and converted it into a day-glow absurdity where Gotham became a circus and the Caped Crusader became a brand ambassador of that circus. The film managed to make a killing at the box office and flooded the markets with merch, and for a second there, introduced a whole new definition of superhero cinema. However, a deeper dig might also bring up that Schumacher was flirting dangerously close to an aspect of the world's greatest detective that even the comic book has a difficult time touching: his mythos. Let's dive deep into Batman Forever and see what works and what doesn't, and whether it survived in a world where superhero films are regular fodder for the fans.
Your entrance was good, his was better.
Back in the 1980s, when it was first announced that there would be a Batman movie, it was some of the most exciting news fans of DC Comics could have expected. DC had already experienced a roaring success with the Superman films, and the audience's love for them proved they could experiment with more characters. Tim Burton was set to helm the project. He would go on to cast Michael Keaton as the titular Batman, something that would get a reaction of its own from the fans. But the bigger fear was the chance that Batman would again be the campy version that we got from the 1960s Adam West version. Even though Tim Burton was known for his dark narratives, which included a mix of everything and a dash of horror, fans feared Batman would not get the treatment he deserved. All this doubt was proved wrong when the film came out in 1989, and the dark take would permanently set the tone for the new Batman on screen. The film also got a new cinema certificate introduced to the world, the 12A, which would allow the younger generation of Batman fans to watch it while being aware of the violent content. And Michael Keaton turned out to be the perfect choice, unique blend of dark, moody, and comic acting, along with the tortured soul of Bruce Wayne seeking revenge. It was a huge success from every angle, and it only made sense to continue, and a sequel would soon go into development with the same director and lead actor. This time, Burton would rework the shades of darkness he had brought in the first film, add a violent and terrifying performance from Danny DeVito as the Penguin. But it felt as though the audience wasn't happy with this take, and they thought that it was unnecessarily bleak with a disappointing plot. Even though the film enjoyed box office success, it didn't manage to live up to the response of the first film. It would later be found that Burton was unwilling to work on the sequel because of the trouble he'd had with studio involvement while making it. So Warner Bros. Saw that they had a good franchise in their hands and didn't want Tim Burton to continue as the director, even though Burton already had some plans for the third film, including Two-Face. So Joel Schumacher would be brought in to helm the third entry, with Burton giving his approval and sticking around as a producer for the project. After going through various levels of development, the film would finally get a title: Batman Forever, which Burton hated. However, the name passed through several focus groups, and it became a film targeted at the MTV generation. The late great Val Kilmer was brought in to take on the role of Batman after Burton left the project because he didn't like the direction in which it was being taken. Yes, the movie had already started to see some trouble in the casting phase itself, but Joel Schumacher went full steam ahead. The film was finally released on July 16, 1995. Well, the film ended up grossing $336.5 million, more than Batman Returns. It ended up being a box office success. It would end up being the second highest grossing film in the US in 1995, right behind Toy Story. But the box office didn't count for everything. Warner Bros. Was experimenting with the character, and they wanted to stray from the Burton-esque tone, something that was very much demanded. The experiment was a success, and the film managed to stick to the tone that Burton had created in his first two entries. The visuals and take on the characters would be considered a bold attempt at the time, but that would all be because the film failed to connect with the audience in every other aspect, the lack of a solid storyline, feeling of bloated and unsatisfying noise. Burton's nightmarish world was changed into one that had the colorful visuals of the Adam West Batman TV series, and it was considered an interesting choice, but at the cost of ruining Batman itself. Kilmer did feel like an odd choice for the character, and Chris O'Donnell's Robin also felt a little too old for the role. But then, Val Kilmer didn't have a great time working on the project, even though he had joined just after hearing Joel Schumacher's name. Following Burton's departure as the director, Michael Keaton had initially been excited to work with Schumacher too. When he first got a chance to look at the script, he felt that it sucked. Even though he continued to work on the project, he finally had to give up as he saw how much Schumacher criticized the dark tone Burton was setting up with the previous films. In a 2017 interview, Keaton explained his criticism of the film, blaming the tendency of the 1990s films towards going for excess. I tried to be patient, but after a certain point, I was like, I can't take this anymore, that this is going to be horrible. Look, there was some really horrible taste in the 90s, and I probably contributed to that. Fortunately, it was a time of nouveau-rich excess, and I thought, I'm in this job for the long run. I don't want this. And the truth is, I'm not boasting, but I was correct. There are a whole load of people who ran things that are long gone, he said. Schumacher loved Val Kilmer's performance in Tombstone and decided to cast him as the Caped Crusader. Kilmer had just visited a Batcave in Africa when his agent contacted him about the role, and the director and actor agreed regarding the next entry in the Batman film series. However, once filming began, the onset of the feud was something that Schumacher hadn't expected because however talented Kilmer was, there was talk about how difficult he was to work with. Who can forget the huge trouble that the island of Dr. Moreau went through and how much the actor was responsible for it? But Schumacher wasn't interested in the stories and said, I've heard that about many talented people, hired them anyways, and had no problems whatsoever. However, once production began, Schumacher changed his views, and in later interviews, he said that he and Val Kilmer had a physical pushing match. He was being irrational and ballistic with the first AD, the cameraman, the costume people. He was badly behaved. He was rude and inappropriate. I was forced to tell him that this would not be tolerated for one more second. Then we had 2 weeks where he didn't want to speak to me. It was bliss. But that was just one of the feuds that took place behind the camera because Jim Carrey was very open about the tension that he felt while working with Tommy Lee Jones, because Tommy Lee Jones was acting absolutely awful to Carrey. Carrey had become an overnight sensation with Ace Ventura and The Mask, and his fans felt that casting him as the Riddler was equivalent to casting Jack Nicholson as the Joker. Tommy Lee Jones wasn't really a fan, and it becomes a lot clearer based on this particular interaction that he had with Carrey at a restaurant, a story that the comedian recounted on Norm Macdonald's show. I went over and said, "Hey Tommy, how you doing?" And the blood just drained from his face like he had been thinking about me 24 hours a day. It was before the biggest scene we have together in the movie. Blood just drained from his face. He started shaking and he got up and he must have been in mid-kill me fantasy or something. He went to hug me and said, "I hate, really don't like." I said, "Gee man, what's your problem?" I pulled up a chair, which probably wasn't smart. He said, "I cannot sanction your buffoonery." But Carrey didn't take it to heart, and he told the Oscar-winning actor, "Well, you know, I think this part requires, the tone of this thing is kind of like childlike evil, and I think you might be having some trouble getting there, so I wish you the best." But it's not fair to only look into the behind-the-scenes trouble that Joel Schumacher went through, because even Tim Burton had indicated having a really bad time he was working on the sequel. Burton had some really interesting plans for the film that were dropped entirely for the sake of merchandising, and other plans ended up giving us Batman Forever. Burton's plans for a third entry involved the title Batman Continues, which we gotta say doesn't really work as a follow-up to Batman Returns. However, the plan involved continuing the arcs of Keaton's Batman, Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman, and Billy D. Williams as Harvey Dent in their respective roles, and a cohesive storyline that would have made for a perfect follow-up to his original entries. Tim Burton was looking into including the Riddler as the villain, something that did end up happening in Batman Forever, but Burton had completely different plans for the character. He was planning to rope in Robin Williams for the role, even though the actor and comedian had a weird history with Burton's Batman films. So, back when the casting for the 1989 Batman was being done, Jack Nicholson, who gave his iconic take on the Joker, needed a bit of a nudge to be convinced to take on the role. The producers decided to play along by initiating negotiations with another major star, just so that Nicholson could feel left out and jump in to take the offer. The trick worked, and Jack Nicholson nabbed the role before anyone else could be confirmed, and thus, we ended up with one of the most iconic performances in a comic book movie or in Jack Nicholson's career. However, the actor who was used to lure Nicholson into the project was none other than Robin Williams. He felt completely used by this treatment. In a later interview, the late great comedian explained, "I replied, but they said I was too late. They said they'd gone to Jack over the weekend because I didn't reply soon enough. I said, you gave me till Monday. I replied before the deadline. But it was just to get Jack off the pot." Tim Burton approached Robin Williams for the role of the Riddler, but by the time the wheels were moving, Warner Bros. Brought in Joel Schumacher to helm the film, and thus, Robin Williams never got to be in a Batman film, while Jim Carrey ended up playing Edward Enigma. No wonder Tim Burton had trouble working with these producers. Another solid aspect of Burton's sequel was bringing back Michelle Pfeiffer's character, who was revealed to be alive at the end of Batman Returns. However, with Batman Forever, these plans were scrapped. Instead, Warner Bros. Decided to continue Catwoman's arc with a spin-off to Batman Returns. Burton was attached as the director. Burton dropped out of the project. The entire concept was stuck in development hell until a few years later. It would eventually become the critically panned Halle Berry film that was nowhere near Tim Burton's version of Catwoman. Catwoman wasn't the only one set to return, as Billy D. Williams was also going to return as Harvey Dent in Burton's plans, and this time around he was supposed to make his transformation into Two-Face. It seems that Joel Schumacher's version accepted some version of this plot. We got to see Tommy Lee Jones in the role of Two-Face. Funnily enough, Jones was reluctant to take on the role, and he only did so because of his son's insistence. It makes sense for him to have shown his frustration about working on that project by giving us a version of Two-Face that was pretty close to some version of Joker. At the same time, Jim Carrey might have faced his wrath, as we talked about. While Robin Williams was left out in the worst possible way, Marlon Wayans had a good time despite not appearing in the films. Wayans was Burton's pick for Robin, and he had already cast him for the project, had even signed a contract, and even had some wardrobe fitting done. Still, Schumacher canceled this entire idea and cast Chris O'Donnell for the project. Wayans walked away with some money as a penalty fee because of the contract, probably still receives royalty payments, a role he never had the chance to play. At least it's better than the case of Robin Williams. Now, even though Warner Bros. Shifted from Tim Burton to Joel Schumacher because of some creative differences regarding the tone that Burton was going for, there was a lot more at play here than just that factor. Burton's departure could be blamed on your favorite burger chain, McDonald's, because of the merchandising failure they felt with Batman Returns. The Batman films were targeted with a wide range of marketing strategies, and merchandising was one of the biggest things that was looked into. During the marketing of Batman Returns, the LA Times reported that about 120 product tie-ins, including talking toothbrushes, roller skates, and naturally t-shirts, boxer shorts, sunglasses, and throw pillows, as well as beach towels, beanbag chairs, weightlifting gloves, and even mugs were planned. If that sounds crazy, then it makes sense because marketing at this level had never been approached before. It was clear that a lot was at stake, including the content that the film itself could deliver. So yes, it was somehow the director's responsibility to make the movie in a manner that could lend to the merchandise for the partners with the licensing fees. Batman Returns had a darker tone with character designs that were much more Burton-esque. Who can forget the sequence where Danny DeVito chomped on a raw fish? But as much as it made the Penguin appear as a formidable villain, Donald's had a different feeling since, according to Burton, he responded to the movie with, "What's that black stuff coming out of the Penguin's mouth? We can't sell Happy Meals with that." Even the action figures and other toys released then as a tie-in to the film had no connection with the movie and instead relied on Batman the Animated Series. So, the marketing for the film failed to capture the essence of Returns. Once the audience saw the movie, they understood that Burton's vision probably offended these strategies and subsequently had little to no idea of what he was delivering. Scriptwriter Daniel Waters stated in an interview regarding the early viewings that the lights are coming up after Batman Returns, and it's like kids crying, people acting like they've been punched in the stomach, and like they've been mugged. Part of me relished that reaction, and part of me to this day is like, oops. After realizing that the key license holders for the marketing of the film had plowed something around $60 million into TV advertising, which was 3 times more than what WB itself spent on the marketing, it became clear to WB that Joel Schumacher presented a better option for the next entry. What did Batman Forever do to save the franchise? The first trailer for the film was dropped in February of 1995, and eager viewers were treated with something bizarrely long that featured everything from Val Kilmer in the Batsuit to Jim Carrey dancing around as the Riddler. Even Dick Grayson ended up appearing in the Robin outfit, along with the set design that used Tim Burton's Gotham as a base and filled it with colors, making the film feel like a living comic book. If you were a 12-year-old kid around the time the film was released, there's no chance you'd be left out of the hype that the film managed to create, with every single step being a big lesson from the experience Warner Bros. Had with Returns. Batman Forever exploded into pop culture like a neon-lit, colorful marketing bomb and became a movement and a lesson in marketing. While the bat signal had always been a favorite ever since the 1989 film, this time around it wasn't just sticking to the cinema screens, as it made it into the hands of kids as McDonald's collectible glass cups, Kenner action figures, and even in their stationery. You could eat, ride, and even write letters as Batman himself. At a time when actors like Val Kilmer would be seen selling pricey cars that only the elite could afford, the actor was literally advertising the half-price promotion for the new Batman roller coaster at Six Flags. Next up was the soundtrack, which would be a perfect addition to the strategy as it featured some of the biggest stars, ranging from U2 to Brandy, The Offspring, and even Method Man, crammed into a single CD, even though only 5 of the songs actually made it into the film, but that didn't matter. Finally, Seal's Kiss from a Rose won 3 Grammys and became the perfect ballad to the Bat romance between Val Kilmer and Nicole Kidman. Well, the 1989 film hit the mark with how it was marketed and changed how to put superheroes on screen. Batman Forever is responsible for how we see merchandising associated with major projects, including the likes of major Marvel projects nowadays. Remember that huge Batmobile from the film? It went through various redesigns and even featured work from H.R. Giger, who is popularly known for his work in developing the Aliens look and feel from the Ridley Scott films. But Giger's ideas would be dropped, and the production made a giant Batmobile that was quite difficult to drive, and it went through an accident at the beginning of production for the film. According to production designer Barbara Ling, unfortunately, the first day the stunt guy drove the Batmobile, he actually had an accident. The fins acted like a very big wing. For a stunt guy, getting used to that, when you go to make a turn, it's the weight value of how that wing created a flow to the back tires. He tried to do a 360 and that wing flipped him around. That was the first day, and we saw the driving and we said, oh great, repair. Then they got the hang of it. It's not a normal car. That explains the level to which the production had to work to make something look amazing, but then it was probably the most difficult part of the film's production. We never would have thought about that while we played with our own Batman Forever Batmobile miniatures. While we got to see a wide variety of action figures, one missing from all of it had to be that mysterious giant bat that has since become one of the most talked about aspects of the film. So based on the details about the film that were released later on, it has been indicated that the film had some really interesting plans that would have adhered to a darker tone. In fact, one of the sequences that was deleted from the feature actually proves just how much darker it would have been, as it dealt with Bruce blaming himself for the death of his parents. After the brief amnesia that he experienced following the battle with Two-Face that had destroyed some part of the Batcave, Bruce descended to a deeper part of the cave that had somehow managed to survive the attacks, and here he acquires an alternate Batsuit. But an extended bit of the scene involved Bruce discovering that he wasn't responsible for his parents' deaths based on an entry in his father's journal. In fact, he reclaims his identity as Batman as a giant bat flies up to him, making for a sequence that we can only expect to see in the comic books. The scene was probably cut because of its terrifying tone and the chances of giving the younger viewers nightmares. Other deleted sequences also prove that Schumacher wanted to use a tone similar to Burton's for the film, particularly the alternate opening and ending. The original opening sequence would have seen a doctor visit Two-Face's cell, only to find him gone, and the words, "The Bat must die," written on the walls. Meanwhile, the ending would have featured Batman and Robin standing atop a gargoyle overlooking the city, which is quite similar to the ending of the 1989 film. While fans have debated how much impact the inclusion of these scenes might have had on the film, one can say that it somewhat affects the tone of the film, and maybe those who liked the movie a bit would have had more reason to enjoy it. There was also a sequence that was a reference to substance abuse, as Riddler, Two-Face, and Two-Face's henchwomen, Sugar and Spice, could be seen taking several hits of the Nigma Tech box and ending up exchanging their opinions on some philosophical beliefs. Over the years, many more of these deleted scenes have come out, and fans have discovered a different plan that Schumacher had for the character, one that was more focused on exploring an internal battle that Bruce Wayne had been fighting with himself and his identity as Batman. Even though it will never be counted among the best of Batman features, it's surely one of the most introspective Batman films left on the cutting room floor. Even though we won't get to see Schumacher's original cut like we did with Zack Snyder, fans are well aware that Batman Forever featured a unique vision that did manage to influence later renditions of The Dark Knight in its own way. Batman Forever continues to be a surprising entry into the film series that somewhat follows the movie preceding it while ensuring that it had something of its own to offer fans. While the sequel, Batman and Robin, is universally hated for the absolutely campy treatment it got, Joel Schumacher responded to the whole process as deeply affecting him. He stated, "You know, I just knew not to do sequels ever. If you get lucky, walk away. but everybody at Warner Brothers just expected me to do one, and maybe it was some hubris on my part. I had a batting average of 1,000 here, so I went from falling down a bit after Lost Boys to a kind of genius with The Client, a big blockbuster with Batman Forever, then whoa whoa with A Time to Kill, so my batting average was good. I never planned on being, that dreadful quote, a blockbuster king, because my other films were much smaller and had just found success with the audience and not often with the critics, which is really why we wrote them. And then, after Batman and Robin, I was scum. It was like I had murdered a baby. All of that might be true, but Batman and Robin really deserves a video of its own, so we'll talk about it there. Meanwhile, let me get you in on the mystery behind the bat nipples based on Joel Schumacher's response. Well, it was made by Jose Fernandez, who was our brilliant lead sculptor. If you look at Batman and Batman Returns, it was the genius Bob Ringwood that created those suits, so by the time we got to Batman Forever, the rubber and techniques had gotten so sophisticated. If you look at when Michael Keaton appears in the first suit, you'll notice how large it is. It was brilliant, but the best they could do at the time. By the time Batman Forever came around, rubber molding had become so much more advanced. So I said, let's make it anatomical, and gave photos of those Greek statues and those incredible anatomical drawings you see in medical books. He did the nipples, and when I looked at them, I thought, that's cool. It was cool, Joel Schumacher, and it did look like Batman was a little cold. It managed to haunt fans for a long time, and that's something we'll never forget. He said, maybe I was just naive, but I'm still glad we did it. Batman Forever failed in various aspects, but nobody can forget the visuals it provided and the world it built that felt like real-life depictions of the comic books. Schumacher was a legend at creating a world where his characters fit in perfectly, and Batman Forever might not be amongst his best works, but it clearly proves his ability to tell a story. If it weren't for the crazy marketing strategy that this movie went through, we might not have the absolute madness of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, so maybe Martin Scorsese would have been happy, but the rest of us would have been pretty bummed out to miss that roller coaster. That's all we got for you this time, but if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.